I'm not some incredibly experienced GM, but I have played a bunch of tabletop RPGs very recently, both as a player and as a game master, and I think that regardless of the game you're playing, the system that you're using, that feeling of a good session often comes from the same things. So I thought it would be fun to talk about that. Some of these things will be for the game master, and some of them are going to be for the players. Some of them are going to be for both. Welcome to Polyhedron. I'm Ron. So number one is going to be that players need their characters to feel capable. And that could manifest in different ways. It could mean that they were badasses, or it can just mean that they actually got things done during the session. And there should be plenty of ways for you to give them that feeling based on the type of characters that they're actually playing. For example, if you have a fighter that rolled really poorly during the session and you keep telling that fighter that they swung and missed, and they tried to stab their opponent, but they couldn't reach the monster despite the monster, standing right there, at some point, that's just gonna start feeling bad. And you can say, well, it's, just bad luck, roll of the dice, right? Well, not really, because a bad roll doesn't have to represent the ineptitude of the player character. Like, why would this awesome fighter just keep missing? It doesn't make any sense. But the bad roll could represent just how dangerous the enemy is. A bad roll could represent the enemy blocking with his shield, or someone using some magic to slow you down. A fight versus a competent enemy, even if it's just a low-level monster, is going to make your player character feel more awesome than, just fighting a random monster and not being able to hit it, even though it's standing right there. So in order to make your players feel like competent, badass adventurers, consider making successes internal to them, like they succeeded at something because they tried hard and they were good at it, and failures external to them. They failed because the danger was so great and there are powerful forces working against them. Not all the time, of course. Use judgment. Your player characters can sometimes fail just because they fumbled or something, but try to balance it out. And there could be plenty of examples of this outside of combat and not strictly bound to a simple success or failure on a roll of the dice. It could be a conversation or a journey or an investigation or anything in the game, really. The point is that if your players just spent, a 3 or 4 hour game session being told that they kind of fumbled around not being able to accomplish anything, even though if that's that could be exactly what they did. But regardless, they're not going to walk away from the session satisfied, often even if there were some laughs at the table during the whole thing. Obviously, this depends on the type of game that you're playing. These are not hard and fast rules, and there are going to be plenty of exceptions. And expanding on the point of feeling capable is the point of feeling productive, feeling like you did something today. I don't know about you, but for me, taking 3 or 4 hours out of my evening is a big deal. And I love RPGs, but if I'm going to spend hours out of my evening playing, I want to feel like I did something. You know that feeling when you play one of those huge sandbox video games that you just played for who knows how many hours, and you kind of feel crappy at the end of it because you didn't really do anything. You did maybe like one little quest, but the rest of the time was just kind of traveling the huge map and climbing random towers that give you more visibility and fighting random enemies that don't really move the quest anywhere. Well, the same thing can very often happen with tabletop RPGs. In my opinion, it's always going to be better because at least you just hung out with a bunch of friends for a few hours, but a productive game session can just feel freaking amazing. And this one is on both the GM and the players. Some games have a set story and plot, and the GM needs to keep that plot moving. But even in those games, it always feels better when the characters are the one actually driving the story, and it's not just, all things that are just happening to them. So personally, I like to make sure that at least 2 big things, or at least movements in the story, happen in every session. This doesn't have to be some major reveal or plot twist. It can just be an important scene or action that somehow affects the story. And very often, this is something that the players have to be sensitive to as well. For example, tell me if this sounds familiar, you're sitting in the tavern, maybe having some, just idle chit-chat, nothing's really happening. The GM starts describing the food and, someone asking you if you want to order drinks. I promise you that the GM is waiting for the characters to move the story along because they prefer not to just, shove the story down their throats with a mysterious stranger comes in or you just happen to overhear. And, if you wait long enough, those things will happen for sure. But as a player, you can recognize those slower moments where it's not like there's some great role playing going on where the characters get to know each other over the dinner table or whatever, but it's just boring and nothing's happening. You can recognize that moment and you can take action. All right, we need to take down this dragon, but we're not strong enough. What can we do right now that will help us get closer to solving this problem? And then you get up and you punch the innkeeper in the face, or not. Just recognize that it's the time to do something. And from the GM's perspective, there are a ton of great videos and resources out there about how to keep the story moving, but let's assume that you did and it was a pretty good session, like one of those mid-game, fun, but not crazy intense session. A tool that I found really helps end the session on a high note and have everybody walking away with a feeling of accomplishment is the simple recap. Very often we'll end a game session and we'll all just kind of sit there for a little bit, digesting everything that just happened. And that's a perfect time for the GM to say, okay, so today you ventured into the bandit hideout. You struck a deal with the second in command who promised you that he'll let the prisoners go if you kill his boss. Then you fought and killed the bandit leader and his loyalists, but the second in command double-crossed you and you ended up chasing her out of the hideout and then she got away. You then talked about how she could possibly be a problem in the future and how she can join up with your other enemies, and you decided to join forces with the city guard and try and track her down. I found that this can give everybody a really cool moment of, wow, we actually got a lot done today, more than we thought. Because as you're doing these things, especially in a really big campaign, it's easy to lose track of how small steps culminate into bigger strides towards the resolution of a storyline. And also it makes it easier for the players to then talk about the session since you've just given them a concise rundown of all the awesome stuff they did. And the final thing, which of course not everybody is going to agree with, is that telling a cool story and creating that lasting feeling of awesome after a session is more important than following the rules very closely. The rules in every game are important because that's where the challenge comes from, and like they say in D&D, that's what makes it a game and not just a exercise in, joint improvised storytelling. I don't remember how they phrase it. And honestly, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to pause the game for a second and, look up a rule and say, oh, right, that's how it works. So no, you can't do that. But as the GM, if you need to bend the rules a little bit to create an awesome moment for your characters, that's always going to be worth it. Whether that is, making an enemy stronger on the fly because the fight is a little bit too easy, or having some powerful wizard paralyze the characters with some spell that you just made up. Keep the game going and focus on creating an interesting story within the general framework of the rules. This is of course going to be more relevant to some games more than others. Super relevant to D&D, for example. It's a great system, but if you try to follow every rule to the letter, you'll just be reading the player's handbook more than you're actually playing. I love D&D, but it's heavy. So players, trust the GM and go with their prompts, and GMs focus on creating cool moments for your characters. Most of the time, the rules will empower you to do just that. But when they don't, prioritize whatever will have your players walking away from the table or Zoom call most likely, thinking about that session all night. That's going to be it for this time. I hope this is useful for you. Let me know in the comments, what do you consider your kind of like principles of a good game session, either as a player or as a character? Let's go with 3. Like, what are 3 things that you consider like the core tenets of a great session? I look forward to reading those.